Oh,
Sweet, lovely, thank you. Yeah, and I think that actually is a good entry into this because, of course, working with other people, you can't really work with them unless you know your own fear or know how you are with fear. And in general, I think fear is probably the hardest thing to deal with. It's sneaky in the sense that you don't always recognize what's going on as fearful, but it does. There's this idea in the work we do that we're aiming for our wholeness. So there's like this aliveness, this depth of our own aliveness that we have to really get to know, and we have to be willing to integrate all aspects of ourselves for our wholeness. And it doesn't matter what the thing is. Fear. Well, we push that away. I'm not going to be. You get people who will say that. Well, I'm not going to be afraid. I think it was Roosevelt who had the saying, feel the fear and do it anyway. Is that what the saying is? Or it's not nothing to fear, but fear itself. That's his saying. There's nothing to fear but fear itself. And in some ways, he's very right. But people hear that as saying, push the fear away. Don't pay attention to it. And I actually don't think that's what the key is at all. It's fear is there when it's there. And it's because it can vary from just low level anxiety to this full blown like panic state. It can be hard sometimes to track it, but when you think about it, the level of emotional and physical toll it has in someone is enormous. People's heart, this is why it's difficult to work with. Their heart starts beating, they can't breathe well, their stomach clenches in varying degrees. But really, the biggest thing that happens is your thinking triggers. And I know that sometimes in this work it sounds like we're giving thinking a bad rap, and we're not. Because thinking can be as holistic and whole as any other aspect of ourselves, and is as holistic and whole. But our culture, particularly Western culture, seems to have trained thinking to be in one specific way. And its big role, and I think even its big role in our lives, is as a protector. It's like this rugged old warrior who, the moment you're under threat, the moment fear appears on the horizon, it pulls up into action because it's trying to keep you safe. And that often can be the most difficult part of working with fear, is the goodness of the thinking that goes on. It explains things away. I had someone yesterday, it was an email, and without too much detail, but I reckoned over the last month, I've been really aware this, she's been triggered by something really fearful. And she doesn't quite know what to do with it. And yesterday, the email was, well, I've healed the feeling part, so that's not the issue, but my philosophy is, and I thought, oh boy, there it is. There's thinking right in there saying, let's give you a philosophy, put this all in thought, because that will keep you safe. If you can stand on the principle, then you don't have to deal with this really in any sort of way. And it's that's what makes it so difficult. So that's the thing to be aware of, because some of you, when you watch what's going on at the moment, because this is part of the reason I thought, oh, really what I want to offer is all is a journey to fear, our own fear. But to be aware in our culture that we see this going on right now, people panicking and thinking and sorting things out in all sorts of ways and absolutely sure that this is the right way to go. And here in America, it's been fascinating to watch the people getting into the whole, no one can take my freedom away idea, and do it at a detriment to themselves and to other people. And the amount of energy that's behind it is fascinating. And you think, wow, this is, it's very nice to go and stand on your principles because it feels to you probably like solid ground. It's certainly more solid than thinking, I'm scared. This is fear, I'm scared. So this is the trick for working with yourself and also working with someone else. If you have someone coming in, they say to you, well, I know I'm afraid, I'm in a panic because XYZ. The real trick to get them to pause for a second is to say, let's just say I'm in a panic and not assign it to a reason. Because the moment you start assigning it, it's calming it down and moving it, and thinking is saying, I know really what's wrong here. And it doesn't. There's a time of saying to thinking, hey, Thank you. I know you're trying to protect me, but let's just go into our imaginations and really work with this. And that's, I mean, that's really what I want to offer today is that. But these are, you know, I've been thinking, I mean, I spent yesterday because we had, our internet went down for most of yesterday. And I was kind of thinking, oh my goodness, if it does this tomorrow, what are we going to do? But I always have loads to do. So I started working on both the recordings for Something is Something, Nothing is Nothing, Something to Something is the next one. And I also was trying to finish off transferring Steve's book on the Annals of the Four Windows into a format. So we have to get it renewed and publishing. And I'm just working on it. And it was like delving into the work that we do from when Steve started years ago, and also listening to the Nothing is Nothing tapes. And I really was struck by the insight he had way back, like 30 years ago when he first brought out that book. And it's shifted because always the book I loved best was the Animals of the Totem Pole Process. But I'm actually now really thinking this book is classic. This is just such a brilliant book. And it is this idea that our wholeness and our aliveness is where we need to ground ourselves. And so anything that distracts us out of that, the things you watch for are the things that are frozen, you know? Even the solidity of thinking can be something that deters our embracing our aliveness. Because it's like something that's frozen. And as Steve said, it's all about evolution too. Everything is renewing and constantly renewing. And the moment you start stopping that flow, it's something you need to pay attention to and probably journey into it if you're going to do that. But not everyone is, but just to be aware, those little places that you find a stopping point is something to wonder about at times because it freezes them. And we're not about freezing it. And fear is probably the thing that freezes so many people in so many ways. And I don't think many people even know they're afraid. I was aware last summer, the young guy, and I said, why are you so adamant you need a gun? And he said, well, what if we get invaded? Now, I'm not American. I wasn't brought up here. None of you, well, you're American, but you've moved around. And I couldn't get that because this is this huge country that, you know, because I think of Ireland, yeah, we have been invaded. We have been occupied, we've had all these things, but people there don't sit there saying, what if we get invaded again and need to own a gun? While here, which is a country that hasn't ever been invaded, people have, there is a level of fear. And yes, there have been awful things happen, you know, it's true. But the level, there's like, you know, as I say to Steve, this whole training that went on in America about the nuclear things, is it the duck and roll, or what was it? They just go under their desks at school. This was a drill in case there was a nuclear attack that you would go under your desk in school. And Steve said, yeah, it wouldn't do anything to help us, you know, in reality. And I said, yeah, except it taught you all to be afraid. I said it was a really good way of teaching people to be afraid. So fear is there and it gets activated and we all have our ways into it. I wanted to give you something because if someone comes into you and you're saying, is this person afraid or how do I work with it? These are the things to pay attention to, what they're saying and where their thinking is going and what they're landing on as certainties that you might want to pull them back a little from. If they do something like, it's because, you know, I'm afraid because. The because, and you start dealing with the because part, it really takes you away from the fear. And it's more useful to say, well, why don't you just stop it? I'm afraid. I'm afraid. And then you can go and say, hello, fear. What do you need from me? And that's where I kind of wanted to go with this. But it's good to be aware that it can be disguised when someone comes into you to work with you. If you're going to work with someone else, it can be disguised. It can be hidden in all sorts of, if you see rapid thinking going on, you can all be suspicious a little bit and say, no, I wonder is there a fear underneath this? There's certainly a strong emotion under it, but what is that? This rapid thought. And you see it in people. I mean, I'm convinced that, you know, most of you have heard me speak at some stage or other, especially in the last 12 months. And I know it's the fear of a little girl. That's what she lives, this fear of the small child somewhere that has never been dealt with. So it's turned into this paranoia, and it's turned into, you know, well, she can't, it's just this constant fear. And it started like almost like this little pebble that has never been, the wound from that has never been healed for her. And I think those are the things to watch, the barriers that go up, the certainties. When someone lands and they're absolutely sure this is where they are, you can begin to wonder, is there a fear behind that? Why is the wall up? But that's all great. But thinking wise, you know, explanation wise, there's all sorts of people you can listen to about fear, but in the end, when it comes to it, you will be effective working with someone else's fear if you're effective at working with it. And that's where it is. And that's what the journey is, to say, hey, can I go in and say to fear? Can I call for a guide to fear? And say to it. I mean, I've watched myself do it. You know, the energy goes to what you think the fear is about, rather than saying, wow, what's this fear? I'm afraid. Or I'm angry. Any of your emotions, you work with them the same way. You know, I'm angry because. Well, if you can stop the because and say, I am angry, you can work with it. But if you go, I'm angry because, and you try and work out there, but in fact, you need to just come back and say, hey, where am I? Where am I? And really, that's what the thing is. And that's what I wanted to say a little about it, because I think it's such an interesting emotion. I don't know if emotion's the word, but it is, I suppose. It's such an interesting emotion. And there's so much of it going on right now. And you've either people doing, I'm terrified and I'm not ever going to go and meet another human being again as long as I live, to the people who are going, I don't believe any of this is going to affect me. I'm just going to go out and do whatever I want. But I think they're both fear reactions. One of them, you've just managed to push it way down, because the truth is the middle path is probably the best, whichever one we go. You know, there's a need to be a little sensible, whether, you know, it doesn't matter what your stance is, whether, you know, you really trust that your imagery and your healing abilities can heal this in yourself or protect yourself, or whatever way people want to describe it. There's a place of really saying, wow, I can stand in myself and make the best decisions. But if I'm doing it from an unknown place of fear or anger or upset, I can't make the best decision for me. And we're all living in a world, even if people are into holistic medicines or wherever they're standing in those medicines or more ancient traditions, whatever it is, we also live in a world that the big story is science. So we understand when someone says it's a virus. We understand that, well, we might, but the reason you wash your hands is that viruses have a fat layer, a lipid layer. So by washing them with soap and water, you take off the lipid layer and they're dead. Those are great thinking facts and science facts. And we have the ideas that, you know, if we touch the thing with it, we'll catch it. So it doesn't really matter where we are in our spectrums of other things. We also still have the scientific end. And those are big storylines. And we need to figure out for ourselves where we stand, so that we don't, either through emotional stress or feeling-wise, make ourselves vulnerable. I know some people would talk about the 1918 flu, for instance, that part of the reason they believe it was so endemic, apart from just the physicality of the fact that people spread it by coming back from Europe after the war and stuff like that, but the part of the reason it was so devastating is a lot of people believe it was the fear and anxiety of 4 or 5 years of war that had lowered everyone's immunities, and that they were in that place. So even if you say, well, you know, you don't believe in any of the, it doesn't matter who the person is and what they're saying, they believe in those ways or what they accept or not in that. The truth is that if we're going to compromise ourselves by stress, we need to find ways of working with it. And so this, to me, is one of the easiest ways of doing it. And it doesn't, you know, the thing of stopping the statement at, I'm afraid, and letting it go of the because, or I'm angry, I'm sad because, that's the way we work with any of the big emotions. If you can practice that with yourself, you can do it with anyone else you're working. The truth is, what we need to do is journey. And what I'd like to do is propose a little group journey. And we've a number of things here. There's the doorway to fear, which is a really good question to have for your guide. So what we'll do is we'll journey and we'll call for a guide to fear. And it may come in whatever way it comes. It may give you an experience of fear. So there's the work of saying, wow, here I am. Maybe it's a guide you don't like. Maybe it's a guide you will be afraid of. I don't know. So one of the things is, if that's a real question for you, if that's something pressing you, you can say to it, where does this fear enter me? Where is its doorway for me? That's a good question. The question we like that I put up in the beginning was, because that kind of turns the idea of how people often deal with fear on its head, is just say, hey, fear, hello, what do you need from me? That's a good question right at the beginning of any journey. You say hello to your guide. You say, hello, bear, what do you need from me? But immediately it's that communication. Other good questions are, maybe the fear can show you when it first came into your life. Maybe fear can show you what's ready to heal today. Because that would be one of the early questions, and I'll put it out as one of the first ones. What's ready to heal today? One of the big things to ask is sometimes just to say to fear, hey, any of the big emotions, but especially something like fear, hey, are you willing to give me your energy so we can both be alive together? To give me your energy, to give back this energy. Because if a lot of energy's gone into fear, what is it going to take to allow that to be part of your wholeness again? You may have a time when it's a really good thing to be afraid. There's nothing push and ignore fear. There might be times when it's a really good idea to listen to fear. Don't go down that dark alley, because there's a reason for not going down that dark alley or whatever it is. But if you're constantly afraid, you're not going to be able to discern that. So one of the things is, how do I get some of that energy back from my living? Especially if you meet someone, you're working with someone who's very afraid and their lives are almost tied in knots around fear. Well, how do you get them? How do you get them to start that dialogue with fear so it can allow back into their lives some of that energy it is holding on to? Once it's holding on to that energy, there's less of the aliveness available to you. And this is what you're trying to do, is open those doorways. So questions about healing, questions about the origin, questions about doorways. And the simple thing, which could bring your journey in an entirely different way to anything I'm imagining, is fear. What do you need from me? What do you need from me? Very different to, I need this from you, fear. I need you to stop. I need you to go away. I need to not feel you. It's instead saying, hey, I'm willing to be in open relationship with you. And sometimes this might take us a few years to work it out. But let's just start. Let's start by saying, hello, what do you need from me, fear? I think it's always true in this work that you can only bring someone as deep as you've gone yourself, or where you've gone yourself. Mm-hmm. So it's really important for all of us who work in this area to spend time with fear, just as fear. Not the fear because, but the fear itself. So we'll take a few minutes for people to get coffee. I don't know if people want to lie down, sit up, whatever it is. Okay, so just give yourselves permission to enter the space where you can journey. And part of that is giving your body permission to find its own comfortable place. And I'm aware that a guide could turn up to you at any time. You're all very experienced journeyers. So do follow your guide. And you might just take a few deep breaths at the beginning, just to create some space. All this talk is fine. The talk is thinking, and talk is language explaining. And really what we need to do today is experience. And we're going to do that through meeting our guide to fear. And it's a very personal fear. our own guide to our fear, whatever aspect of fear wants to come to you today. And you know this in total trust. So as your body begins to relax, allow it to feel support. Really, really giving yourself permission to feel how supported you are in this moment. Some of that support is physical, coming through chairs or floors or mattresses. But some of it is coming from earth, and it may help you to connect with that by letting your roots grow deep into the earth. Really leaving those roots go down. Trusting that however those roots have come to you today, they're exactly what you need. And you know that even the tiniest of root is strong enough to break a rock. So no matter how your roots are, they are more than adequate for this holding right now. So give yourself permission to be supported deeply and wholly and fully. And when you're ready, you can give your attention to breath. Just that in and out of breathing that happens so naturally every day, in every moment, without any stress. That's your connection to sky. That sky fills you with each breath and nourishes you. And you give back to sky with each out-breath those things you don't need right now. And they are accepted without question. And so give yourself permission to give away or give back right now things you don't need, so that you create space in yourself. And there's space, more than enough space for you in this journey and all of yourself to be present. You know, you can draw on the great space that surrounds our planet, and you can call on the great energies that are there too, if those are needed. But really, the space is inside yourself, and it's into that space that allows you move towards the place of your deep wisdom and deep imagination that you enter right now, moving gently and surely and supportedly to that place where you meet your guides, so that you can call out and ask for the animal or guide to fear to come and to be with you. Trusting that whatever guide comes is exactly who you need. And when your guide comes, you can thank it for coming. And ask it what it needs from you. And give your guide all the space it needs to be present with you, but also to respond to you. You can also simply ask what needs to happen today between us. And if it seems appropriate, you can ask your guide, what's ready to heal today? Is anything ready to heal? If your journey doesn't seem to move too easily, you can always ask your guide, what needs to happen now? And remember to communicate with this guide any feelings you have, any thoughts that are there. Any physical sensations. If it seems appropriate, you can ask your guide, to what do I most need to pay attention around fear or around whatever's happening in your journey? If it seems appropriate, you can ask about the doorway to fear for you. What is the doorway to me and fear? And remember, you can always return to the question of what is ready to heal today. And it seems appropriate. You can ask your guide, what about fear do you most need to pay attention to in your life right now? Where does it reside for you? And if it feels appropriate, you can ask again, fear, what do you need from me now? And if you need more time, just raise a hand. Thank you, thank you. Take all the time you need. There's no rush at all. Just stay with your guide. And trust that guide. Remembering to communicate fully with him or her. If you need more time, just raise a hand. And take all the time you need, there's no rush. There's plenty of time and space in this. Those of you who are finished and moving around a little, if you want to, make notes of whatever you can. Everyone's on mute, so you won't disturb someone else. Just keep to your own space and allow those who are journeying to journey and take all the time and space they need. So just take a few moments because some people are just now finished. So it'll take a few moments to write or to relax or gather yourself. There's no rushing. And when we're ready, then we'll gather in circle again. I also would encourage any of you to actually pay attention to this because it may have woken up something that you just need to do an individual journey with. And I would certainly say do this. And I really do think it's a really important thing for us, you know, whether we ever work with someone else, but for us ourselves to pay attention to how fear comes to us and how we might wonder, you know, especially if our thinking is trying to protect us from that, or our body's trying to protect us, what that is. I mean, and you know, the journeys were so individual. This whole idea of a time when we knew that we needed to take the war out of people before they returned home. And I think our culture has forgotten that, or our culture is so constantly at war. There's no longer that time. Before we say to, these days it's both men and women who have gone to war, to say, hey, let's take the war out of you. And yet any of us who've suffered a trauma or have lived in life that has a trauma, at some level, we also are at war. You know, it's the same idea that we need to take, and the taking out of us might be the wrong image, because really what we're saying, we need to integrate this energy back in a way that's holistic for all of us. Because you see it, I mean, you kind of wonder with, I just feel like people's injuries are on full display at the moment with what's going on with this coronavirus and the fallout from it. And I mean, you look at Donald Trump that day when the reporter said to him, what do you say to people who are afraid? Because that was what he asked him. And he launched into this thing about how the reporter was such a bad person to have asked that question. And you think, well, what did it touch? What was the fear in him? You know? And what's that flip? The person who doesn't want to deal with fear at all flips to this other side. And we've seen it. I mean, we've seen it in all our countries. I mean, I look at Ireland, had about 800 years of war at various stages. And in Europe, the Great War, the Second World War, Japan, the Pacific, America, all the things that go on. And yet the willingness we have to do that. And you know, when it comes back to it, how's that triggered? It's triggered by fear. Triggered by fear at some level. The only people we can really work with is ourselves, because we can't really do this for someone else until we've done a good bit of it for ourselves. And you know, I will come back to that. So all the stuff I kind of said, well, when you're working, it's really also when we work with ourselves, you start watching your thinking, watching where you are, watching the signs for yourself, so that you can say, hey, wow, I fear, or I'm angry, or I'm really sad, and not attach it, because the attaching sometimes doesn't allow the healing to come through, because really we're trying to deal with something big. So I thank you all. It just was a tremendous, tremendous power. And I would, again, just say, you know, if you need an individual journey, go for it. You know, I'm certainly available as much as I can be. But do make yourself, you know, say, yeah, this has opened something. Anyone got a